Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming to this wonderful book talk with Professor Yelee. My name is Taeyong Baek. I'm director of Center for Korean Studies. I'm very delighted to welcome today's speaker, Professor Yelee from the Academy of Korean Studies. Professor Yelee received her PhD in Korean linguistics from Yonsei University in 2013 and has been working at the Academy of Korean Studies since 2016. She was here at the CKS as a visiting scholar, as you may remember, from 2021 to 2022. Her research explores the relationship between social change and language changes, focusing on the Korean language shifts that happened in the late 19th and early 20th century when pre-modern Korea was turning into a modern society. She is the author of The Language Problems in Modern Korea, and she received with that book the Park Seung-bin Korean Linguistics Award in 2021. Today, she will talk about her new book, which illuminates the Korean travelers' perspectives on Hawaii during the early 20th century. Dr. An will first introduce Powa-yuramgi, written by Hyun Soon in 1909, which stands as the inaugural document informing Korea of Hawaii's geography, history, and culture, alongside the detailed account of early Korean immigrants' lives in Hawaii. Subsequently, Dr. An will present travelogues about Hawaii published in Korean newspapers and magazines from the 1900s to the 1930s. I'm very delighted to have her because while she was here as a visiting scholar, she not only did the research using our resources at the Center for Korean Studies, but also offered her helping hand to develop further our archival materials and also working on archive space, etc. So visiting scholar seldom works that hard, but she was a model visiting scholar. I'm very glad that she came back to give a talk on her book, and she will continue to work with us because she is also kind of a co-researcher of our SRI Strategic Research Institute project that is funded also by the Academy of Korean Studies. So please give a big hand to welcome our speaker today, Professor An.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for coming today. And I'm so happy to meet you all, some familiar faces and some new faces as well. And thank you, Director Baek, for your generous introduction. And thank you again for the invitation and letting me have this great chance to have a book talk in front of this distinguished audience. And I'm so excited to be back here in this very building that I used to work, because many parts of my book were written on the second floor of this building. And I'm feeling so honored and grateful for this wonderful opportunity to introduce my fresh off the press book, Powa-yuramgi and Modern Travelogues about Hawaii. So this is the outline of today's book talk. I will first introduce some basic stuff of the book, and I will talk about Hawaii's first recognition in Korea as a background. And the main focus will be covered in part 2 and part 3. So let's begin with the introduction. So when you think about travelogues, they are not simply the list of information about the travel destinations, but they reflect the writer's thoughts and feelings. And then in the modern times, there were not many people who could go abroad easily. So many people's perception of foreign countries were highly influenced by the travelogues. And The trip to Hawaii began in the late 19th century as the steam passenger ships began to operate along the trade route. And many people came to visit Hawaii from Europe and America, and some of them left travelogues about Hawaii. For example, the famous American writer Mark Twain visited Hawaii in 1866, and he wrote a travelogue about Hawaii. And his book, he pointed out that the economic benefits of Hawaii, and he tried to persuade the U.S. government to colonize Hawaii in the future. And another famous writer, one of the most famous travelers of the modern times, Isabella Bird Bishop, she also visited Hawaii and wrote about Hawaii. And in her book, she admired how the primitive culture of Hawaii was civilized by Western missionaries. And she wrote that the U.S. played the most significant role in the modernization of Hawaii. Therefore, the annexation of Hawaii by the United States would be inevitable. Then I thought, what about Korean travelers? What did they think about Hawaii when they first visited? So this book intended to collect records of Korean travelers who visited Hawaii in the early 20th century. And by doing so, we planned to explore the importance of Hawaii or significance of Hawaii to modern Koreans through travelogues. So for contemporary Koreans, Hawaii is synonymous with honeymoon destination. But for modern Koreans, Hawaii was a land of opportunity through labor immigration, and geographically speaking, it was the gateway to America. And it was also a base for the independence movement. And on the other hand, Hawaii, which became a U.S. territory, was another exploited land of a weak nation by a strong power, just like Korea was at the time. So this book showcases Hawaii's multifaceted symbolism through the perspectives of various Korean travelers. And this book consists of preface, introduction, and two main chapters. The first chapter deals with Powa-yuramgi by Hyun Soon, and the next chapter includes the travelogues published after Powa-yuramgi. So I will give some examples of each chapter. So the left image is the original text of Powa-yuramgi, and as you can see here, it was written in the mixed script of Chinese characters and Hangul. So we translated the text into modern style sentences, and we also added some annotations for the parts requiring supplementary explanations. And we also used some historical images relevant to the text. So the left page is about Hawaiian language and script. So we added the image of the book alphabet, which is about the first written Hawaiian alphabet published in 1822. And the right page is about Hawaiian music and entertainment. And then the Hyun Soon used the word buraburamu, which means hula dance. And then we found this historical image of hula dancers in early 20th century with a traditional Hawaiian musical instrument. And we also added the original text in the mixed script after the translation. So, and chapter 2 deals with, includes 10 travelogues featured in Korean newspapers and magazines from the 1900s to the 1930s. And those travelogues were also written in the mixed script, but the sentences are way easier than Powa-yuramgi. Therefore, we didn't translate it. We didn't translate them, but we just changed the Chinese characters into Hangul and then put Chinese characters in parentheses. And each travelogue includes an overview introducing the author and the characteristics of the piece. And here are the authors. So I was the research lead, and there were 3 co-researchers. Professor Shinik Chol and Professor Jo Yoongi are doing Korean classical literature, and Professor Seo is doing modern Korean literature. And we four are all working in the same department at the AKS. And Professor Shin and Jo and I were in charge of Chapter 1, Powa-yuramgi, and Professor Seo focused on Chapter 2. And especially Professor Shin and Professor Jo annotated the parts highly influenced from classical Chinese. And we started this book project in May 2021. So it took a little bit more than 2 years and a half until its publication. And during this research period, we were funded by the AKS for a year. And personally, I was working as a visiting scholar for a year here. And my time in Hawaii as a visiting scholar was truly a privilege as a researcher, especially given the nature of this topic. So, and as you may know, the CKS houses abundant documents on the history of Korean immigration. And I also referenced a lot of books about Hawaii's history, culture, agriculture, and also language at Hamilton Library. And we also conducted some field research, which was mostly my part. But one time, my team joined me in Hawaii from Korea, and we visited the plantation villages and also some important places in Korean immigration history. And we learned a lot at the museums and even at the restaurant about Hawaii's culture and then food and history. So one day I came across the word "boi" here. Boi, and you can see in the left side, and then which I couldn't determine its meaning initially. So I drove all the way up to Waiahole Poi Factory, which is famous for traditional Hawaiian food, and tried the boi myself. And another interesting word to me was 면포 과수, meaning breadfruit. And then I understood that 면포 meant bread in modern Korean. It's actually a loan word from Chinese. And then 과 means fruit, and tree means su means tree, so it must be breadfruit tree. But I didn't even know that kind of tree existed. And I was so curious about it because Hyun Soon said the fruit is delicious like bread. So I really wanted to find out what it tastes like. And then my first encounter with this breadfruit was actually at the Bishop Museum. And of course, I was not looking for a tree at the museum, but there was this beautiful wooden sculpture titled Breadfruit. And it was right after I came here, and then I was so happy to finally see the fruit. And then when I finished looking at the exhibition and then went out from the building and proceeded to the garden in the Bishop Museum, and the very tree was standing in front of me, and I felt like it's a destiny or something. And then I was so happy to see that tree, and I wanted to try the fruit. And one day I found the fruits at the down-to-earth organic market in Hawaii, and I bought one and tried it myself. And I'm wondering if there's anyone who tried breadfruit. Yeah, so how did it taste like to you? Did it taste like bread? So it tastes like more like a potato to me. And then later on, when I visited the Polynesian Culture Center, I found this ulu mash. It was like a mashed potatoes. So through my personal experience, I could add the annotation for breadfruit. Yeah, about it. And then, so let's move on to part 1, Hawaii's first recognition in Korea. So I think we should first talk about why Hawaii was called Powa in Korean. So Powa is Sino-Korean word, and the Chinese character for this word is Powa, like that. And Po means hemp cloth, and Wa means to vomit or to sing. So when you think about it, it doesn't make sense at all, because it's not the translation of Hawaii, but transliteration of Hawaii originally in Japanese. So the Japanese pronunciation is Hawaii. So it's more similar. But Korean borrowed the word from Japanese but pronounced each character according to Korean pronunciation. Hence, Hawaii became Powa in Korean. And here's another interesting word, 단양산, meaning Honolulu. And it's a loan word from Chinese. And Chinese people call Honolulu 단양산 because they imported a large amount of sandalwood from Hawaii, and then which led to the extinction of Hawaiian sandalwood. And the Korean borrowed this word, and Hyun Soon also called Honolulu 단양산. And the first record of Hawaii in Korea is 일사짐약, written in 1881 by Lee Hyun-young, who was an envoy to Japan. And this is the book recording his own experiences and observations in Japan. And as you can see in the image, he mentioned Powa twice. And then Powa was mentioned as one of the 17 countries that signed a treaty with Japan. And he said, a Japanese officer said Powa was only a small Pacific country and there was no need to set up a consulate. However, in the following year, another envoy, Park Young-hyo, wrote that Powa consulate was established in Japan that year, and he met a consul from Powa. So likewise, Hawaii was first introduced to Korea through Japan, which is why the most common name for Hawaii was Powa. And I found some other usages of Powa in 승정원 일기, in the part that Go-jong talked to Iwanyoung, an envoy to the States. And then the king asked him whether he saw Danyang, Honolulu, but he said he didn't see Danyang but Powa, which doesn't make sense because he must have arrived in Honolulu, but I think he didn't know Danyang meant Honolulu. And then Iwanyoung mentioned about the diseases and then the traditional oven of the Hawaiian people. And the next year, Go-jong asked Park Jong-yang, another envoy to the U.S., about Danyangsan. So I think the king was pretty curious about Hawaii. And this time, Park Jong-yang gave him the right answer by saying that it was an island belonging to Powa. And then he mentioned about the size and then the diseases and the population problem. And that was all about it. And then, so Powa was initially introduced to Korea through envoys and their quite straightforward comment before Powa-yuramgi was written by Hyun Soon. Powa-yuramgi is a 58-page long travelogue about Hawaii, published in 1909. And it consists of 4 chapters, introduction, geography, and history, and plantations. And each chapter deals with several subtopics. And Powa-yuramgi began with a map of the Hawaiian Islands, indicating the areas where Korean people lived. And from now on, let me briefly introduce the author, Hyun Soon. So Hyun Soon was born into Hyun family, which was famous for the interpreters and then translators in Joseon Dynasty. And he himself was fluent in many languages. So he first got the classical Chinese education when he was young, and he enjoyed composing classical Chinese poetry. And I think this educational background affected his writing styles of Powa-yuramgi. And just like many other middle-class people, Hyun Soon's family and Hyun Soon himself were pretty progressive, and they actively participated in the modernization of Korea after the Kabul reforms. So one day he went to Gwanghwamun and saw Seo Jae-pil made a speech in English, and he was highly influenced, and then he started to learn English at the Royal English Academy. And he also went to Japan to study and then became a Christian there. And after coming back in 1902, Hyun Soon had to make money, and according to his autobiography, he applied for Daschler Bank after seeing an advertisement. And I found the very advertisement he saw in Hwangseong Shinmun, looking for Korean young people fluent in English by Daeshira Eunhaeng in the image, the Daeshler Bank. And the Daeshler Bank and East West Development Company were responsible for Korean immigration to Hawaii. Therefore, we can say that this advertisement was the beginning of his relationship with Hawaii. And Hyun Soon immigrated to Hawaii in 1903 as a part of the second immigration wave. And he was first placed in Kahoku Farm and the north part of Oahu. And then he was working as an English interpreter between the managers and the workers. And at night, he taught the workers English after work. And after 2 years, he moved to Honolulu and started to serve as a preacher. And he also built the churches. And after another 2 years, he moved. And he also moved to Kauai and served as a preacher for 2 years. And he came back to Korea in 1907. And then he published the Powa-yuramgi based on his 4-year and 2 months stay in Hawaii. And after coming back, he serves as a pastor and also an educator. And also, he played a key role in the March 1st movement. And after that, so he dedicated himself to the independence movement. And in 1923, he moved back to Honolulu and in Kauai. And then finally, he moved to Los Angeles and died there. So, if I point out some importance of Powa-yuramgi, I can say these 4 aspects. The first, Powa-yuramgi stands as the first comprehensive document introducing Hawaii to Korea. And it serves as a contemporary account detailing the history of Korean immigration to Hawaii. And this book serves as a reflection of Hyun Soon's political perspective, although the book focuses mainly on some factual information. And in terms of writing style, it demonstrates transitional features between the traditional and modern eras. So from now on, let's take a closer look at each topic. So in Chapter 2, Hyun Soon provided a thorough view of Hawaii, covering the location and the natural environment, races and population, and the living environments, culture in the major cities, and commerce, military power, and then the characteristics of each island. And in Chapter 3, he explained about Hawaii's history from the discovery and then the annexation by the United States. And I think one of his main motivations for writing this book in such a comprehensive and concrete manner was to introduce to Hawaii to Korea, because he believed that Hawaii will become the key hub of the Pacific in the near future. So he predicted the shift of trade centrality from the Atlantic and to the Pacific, meaning that from Europe to America. So with the development of railway transportation in Siberia and also in the States. So in order to support his argument, he illustrated the distance from major cities to Hawaii, and then say that Hawaii is like located in the center from every major cities in the world. And Powa-yuramgi is also very important because it's the record of Korean immigration to Hawaii from a perspective of the contemporary person. So Hyun Soon explained about the living conditions of plantation workers in a pretty detailed way. So he explained about the types of housing and what they ate, and then the labors, and then the work schedules and incomes of the workers, and so on. And in Chapter 1, he extensively documented the history of Korean immigration in Hawaii, like the background and the process, and the important people in the process, as well as the living environment of Korean people, including Korean churches and Korean community and Korean newspapers and magazines. And in Chapter 4, he describes about the plantations, and then not only just the Korean workers, but he explained the history of Hawaii's sugar sugar industry, and then the farm life, and then Korean businesses, drawing from his own first-hand experience. So he gave some concrete examples applying his own experience. Like when he described about Korean business, he said, as among Korean community, there are those who engaged in commercial activities. And Kim Sung-kwon, for instance, earned a reputation as a successful merchant, making $10,000 from his grocery and general merchandise store. But unfortunately, he went bankrupt. And following him, the store of An Hong-gyu in Waipahu flourished, but recently relocated to Honolulu. Likewise, the explanations are pretty concrete and detailed. And then he also recommended the best the hotels by Koreans. And when he explained about the plantation life, he also gave a concrete schedules, or the types of the houses, how the house looked like, and then its construction, constructor, and also how many people share the rooms and something like that. And he also gave an explanation about the cultivation process of sugarcane step by step. And that was the hardest part for us to translate because we had no idea of the farming. And while describing all these abundant information, Hyun Soon expressed his own political beliefs in some parts. So when he explained about the relationship between the climate and the flora and fauna, he kind of blamed the climate as the reason for the loss of territory. So he said, although animals here are large in size, their intelligence is very low and they are slow, so even women and children can easily handle cattle or horses as they are not cunning or sensitive. And he said, similarly, the indigenous people here lack sharp or aggressive traits and tended to be lazy. And his conclusion was, therefore, Hawaii's decline reached its peak, ultimately becoming a territory of the United States. And he said, could the cause be attributed to the climate? And he also commented about the climate, if we consider the aspect of Hawaii's climate bringing boundless happiness, it lies solely in the fact that sugarcane provided livelihoods for tens of thousands of immigrants. So according to him, the very climate that brought hardship to Hawaiians has become an opportunity for Koreans. And then in the part that he describes about the history of Hawaii, he criticized the Queen Liliuokalani, the last monarch of the Hawaiian kingdom, pretty harshly. So let's share some background. Before her reign, her brother King Kalakaua signed the amendment of the constitution in 1887 because he was threatened, and then that constitution took away native Hawaiian land rights and then gave the vote to foreign landowners. So after succeeding the reign, the queen tried to revise the constitution to regain powers for the monarchy and also for the native Hawaiians. However, unfortunately, it caused the overthrow of the Hawaiian kingdom. So she was an unsuccessful monarch, but she was highly respected by Hawaiian people because she resisted to protect the sovereignty of Hawaii and protect Hawaiian people. But Hyun Soon criticized the queen, Queen Liliuokalani sought to adhere to the old regime of monarchy dictatorship, oblivious to the contemporary circumstances. And after Japan-Korea Treaty of 1905 and also 1907, the criticisms of monarchy system among emerged among Koreans. And Hyun Soon also shared that viewpoint. So he criticized the queen from the perspective of a democratic Republican advocate. So he found the commonalities in the cause of the loss of sovereignty in Korea and Hawaii. So I think this part could be interpreted as an indirect criticism of Emperor Gojong, who failed to achieve political reform. And let's talk about the writing styles. So Powa-yuramgi is a unique case of employing two distinct writing styles within a single book. So there are parts with abundant emotional expressions, and then mostly those parts were highly influenced by classical Chinese writing. So he used a lot of classical Chinese phrases and rhetoric. On the other hand, the part focused on conveying information adopted the modern writing style. So it was written according to Korean grammar rather than classical Chinese grammar. But there still were influence from classical Chinese only in the level of vocabulary. And so I will show some example of classical Chinese influence. So this is the part that he described of his arrival to Honolulu. So he was still in the ship and then looking at the scenery of Oahu Island. And he said, at the moment, a single blue mountain emerges through the mist. That's the translation, but in the original text, he used the word Chinese in Chinese characters, Cheongna, but Cheongna doesn't mean blue mountain itself, but La means blue conch, so it's a blue conch. But he didn't mean blue conch emerged. But in classical Chinese, this conch was used to refer to the top knot. It looks similar. And then metaphorically in classical Chinese poetry, this top knot was used to refer to mountain. So if you do not understand this like double metaphorical the usages, you cannot translate it correctly. And another interesting expression was about the diamond head. So he described diamond head seems to wash its feet in the green waves surrounding the Bay of Honolulu. Oh, it's interesting, but we were thinking like, but where are its feet? And then we came to think like when viewed from this angle, Diamond Head might appear as if it's sitting by the beach and then washing its feet in the waves. And here's another interesting one, like about the trees. And then he said, palm trees and mango trees resemble the cloud-like hairs of a beauty after bathing. And then when you look at the palm trees, I'm not sure about mango trees, but when you look at the palm trees in the very windy days, it looks like the female, the long hair. So that's his impression. And then linguistically, Powa-yuramgi is an interesting document showing abundant examples of loanwords, especially for the place names and also personal names. So the left part is the place names of Hawaii, and the right part is just general country and the city names. So Diamond has what's called Kumgangbong, and then Waikiki, Waikiki, and then Vancouver, Manhyangpan, and something like that. So, and then later on in 1939, the famous Korean critic Im Hwa mentioned about Powa-yuramgi, and he said, Hyun Soon's Powa-yuramgi introduced Hawaii to the public and left a lasting impression. So I think Powa-yuramgi was read by many people, and then therefore, I think the travelers who went to Hawaii after Powa-yuramgi was published must have read his book. So let's move on to part 3. So we collected 10 travelogues about Hawaii featured in the newspapers, including 신한국보, 동아일보, and 조선일보, and also in the magazines like 개벽, 동광, and 삼천리. And then let me briefly introduce the authors of each travelogue. And the travelers who went to Hawaii at the time were so-called prominent figures. So you may heard of the name Kang Young-seung. He was an immigrant and he was working at the KNA, and he was appointed as an inspector for the provincial assembly. So his trip was from Honolulu to Hawaii. And later he became president of the North American branch of the KNA. And Kim Dong-sung was, at the time, was a 동아일보 reporter, and he was on his way to Honolulu to attend the Second World Journalists Conference in Honolulu as a representative of Korea. And San Ho-sung is a pen name, but he was a young elite who was on his way to study abroad in the States. And Powa-seng is another pen name, and he was a Korean immigrant living in Hawaii. And Jang Deok-soo was vice president of Donga-ilbo, and later he becomes a politician. And Song Jin-woo, president of Donga-ilbo, he was attending to the first session of Institute of Pacific Relations in Honolulu. And Lee Myung-bin was a novelist, and Kim Tae-sun was a young elite. And then, interestingly, Hwang Il-soo was a boxer. He was on his way to attend the LA Summer Olympics. And here's a famous painter and a writer, Na Hae-seok. She stopped over in Honolulu after her world tour to the Europe and America. So her journey was from the opposite direction, so from San Francisco to Honolulu. And while not applicable to every travelogue, we can compare travelers' thoughts based on their common experiences. So I analyzed their itinerary, and then most people departed Seoul and passed through Busan and Yokohama, and then they were on board and started their 10-day voyage from Yokohama to Honolulu. And then some people described about the whole experience in the ship, like Kim Dong-sung and San Ho-sung. They described about boarding, voyage, and arrival. And then I really liked that part because the voyage was like the biggest part of their travels because it took like 10 days and another 10 days to the way back. And then they only stayed in Hawaii for about like a week. So the voyage part was the biggest part. So they got a lot of experiences and then impressions from it. And then most travelers described about the moment of arrival, although they didn't talk about the voyage itself. And I will just show some examples. So Kim Dong-sung, the journalist, he described about his boarding like analytically in a journalistic manner. So he explained about the year and the location of the ship was built, and that the size of the ship and the capacity like that, a lot of information. And I got to learn that there was the very small number of second class cabin compared to the first class and the third class. And then, and on the other hand, the San Ho-sung, he depicted the departure scene like a scene from a novel. So, according to him, there was a custom of tossing paper ribbons like the one in the picture, from the one hand, the passengers in the ship hold the one hand, and then the other, the friends and families holding the other end. And then when the ship moves, the ribbon will be finally cut, and they felt, it's a real goodbye. And then the passenger felt it's like the real goodbye to the land and my family. And the writer himself was holding a blue ribbon and a red ribbon, and he described about his feelings. But in this picture, all ribbons looked white. But later on, I found a better image in color. That's another scene of the tossing ribbons. And it looks pretty romantic. But this romantic feeling didn't last long for him because he used the third class cabin, and he described the room like it was dark, damp, and smelly, and especially he suffered from the food because he described it disgusting and unbearable. So he skipped several meals and then relying on the fruit, the pear he brought from Korea. And then after a few days, he suggested the future Korean travelers to bring 장조림, 고추장, and 미숫가루, and so on. But he said he had enough money for the first class, but he intentionally chose to use the third class to experience the world. And he was also an enthusiast of Russian literature. So after all, he endeavored to utilize his hardships as assets for his own personal growth. And he said, where did Dostoevsky's masterpiece come from? Was it not from those cold Siberian prisons? And then, interestingly, the name of the ship he was on board was Siberia. And Na Hae-seok's trip was pretty, it contrasted to Sanho-sung's experience of prison because she used the first class cabin. So she describes that the two beds are placed side by side, like the ones in the picture. And then there were like personal servants and many facilities for the passengers, like fine dining restaurants and then lounges and library. And he said, lying on a deck chair, reading a novel, and occasionally chatting with the person sitting next to me feels refreshing. So it's quite opposite to the Sanho-sung's experience. And most travelers described about the joy of seeing land after 10-day voyage in the boundless sea. And then, but among the passengers, Korean people were especially excited about the feeling that they arrived at the land where Korean people lived. So when Oahu Island shows up, they first was looking for the sugarcane fields and the sugarcane factories, and they felt some nostalgic feeling of affection. And then one of them was thinking about whether the smoke from the sugar factory was actually the water spouting from a well, because they spotted several rays on the way. However, their first impression of Hawaii was not entirely positive because they saw these diving boys. So in the modern times, when the ship docks at the port, passengers threw coins in the ocean, and the Hawaiian people dived to retrieve the coins. So there was kind of a custom, and some Korean people looked at the scene with a curious gaze, but some got so furious about that. And this was actually the most frequently mentioned episode in their travelogues. Like Chang Deok-soo, he got pretty angry about that, and he compared the coins as devil's charms, and he was upset because the passengers treated Hawaiians like a dog. And Kim Tae-son, also he got furious about that, and he personally, he recorded his personal experience witnessing American people tossing coins to the laborers in Incheon, and at the time he didn't understand what that means, but he finally got to understand about that gestures, and then he was very mad about it, and he said, "Just as I am human, Hawaiians are also human. Unfortunately, they lack education and are subjected to such humiliation by white people. And I closed my eyes and then prayed for them to receive education in the future. Likewise, they empathized with the Hawaiians." And I also found some interesting difference between the travelers in the 1920s and the 1930s. So in the 1920s, the Korean travelers primarily visited Korean institutions and met Korean people in Hawaii. So Kim Dong-sung, Sanho-sung, Chang Deok-soo, and Lee Myung-bin visited Korean Christian Institute and KNI at the time, 교민총회관, and then 청년회관, and then some of them visited Lee Seung-man's house and Min Chan-ho's house and had dinner or lunch there. And then among them, only Kim Dong-sung went to Big Island and Maui. And in the neighboring islands, he also met a lot of Korean people at the welcome reception, and he visited the plantations and met workers there. And likewise, there was active interaction between Korean travelers and Korean immigrants in the 1920s. However, in the 1930s, we only have two examples, but Hwang Eul-soo and Na Hae-seok, they just focused on the local attractions like contemporary travelers. So they visited the King Kamehameha Estates, Diamond Head, Kapiolani Park, Waikiki Aquarium, and so on. But they didn't mention any Korean name, and they didn't mention any Korean institutes they visited. So when we talk about the experience of the 1920s travelers, their first impression about Honolulu was like full of cars and the road. So they were very surprised at the asphalt road because in Korea at that time the roads were unpaved. So when a car passes through, mostly the cloud of dust followed the car. But in Honolulu there were many cars but no dust cloud. So they were pretty impressed by that. And then Im Young-bin mentioned, in Joseon, I once rode in a car and nearly broke my hips, but here the roads are so flat that the ride was very smooth and comfortable. And then most people commented about the cars and then roads. And then some of them were surprised to see women driving cars themselves. So that's like a cultural shock to them to visit Hawaii. And here's another interesting story. When Jang Deok-soo was in Min Chan-ho's car, so he said, as Pastor Min turned the corner in his car, I found it peculiar how he stuck his left and right arm out of the window with each turn. And he said, why would someone being so busy driving do that? And he thought about that on the way to Lee Seung-man's house, but I think he didn't ask about that. And then after a few hours, he finally realized that here cars run continuously in succession, resembling a car race, and not signaling when turning corners could lead to collisions, hence the reason for such gestures. And at that time, there was no blinker in the car. So he finally understood that. And the travelers were impressed by Korean children living in Hawaii. And then they described Korean children in Hawaii full of vitality and energy, different from Korean children in Korea. And then they were amazed by children's fluent English, and then some of them were shocked that the Korean children couldn't speak Korean. And they were also moved by Korean children singing something about the mother homeland and then at the community event. And there were like meetings between Korean leaders in Hawaii and these travelers. So they met Min Chan-ho. Many of them met Pastor Min Chan-ho, and then some of them met Lee Seung-man and also Hyun Soon after he came back to Honolulu. And then I couldn't find the picture, but they met Choi Chang-duk, the president of KNA in 1926. And then Mr. Park, they didn't mention the name, but he was described as a successful Korean businessman. So they talked about something, and then mostly they asked about the lives of Hawaii, lives of Koreans in Hawaii, and then travelers especially showed a keen interest in the educational situation in Hawaii. And then the immigrants in Hawaii also asked them about how Korea is like nowadays, and then they hesitated to talk about Koreans living in poverty and oppression. And then one of them mentioned that he could speak freely here without surveillance. And then in the travelogue, they stated that they wouldn't detail the conversation, and I think because of the censorship, but some of them just like exemplified the topic, and then they discussed about the situation in Korea after the March 1st movement or the necessity of ethnic unity. And when they visited the KNA office, they saw 태극기 hanging on the wall. And then when they started the ceremony, they sang 애국가 in front of 태극기, and there was a very special experience for Korean travelers. But in the travelogue, they didn't use the term 태극기 or 애국가, and just to say the flag I had seen since I was young, and the song of our country, or like a name I had uttered only once 15 years ago, and I saw an object I had seen only once before because of the censorship. So in a nutshell, travelers experience true face of capitalism from aboard the ship to arrival. And they experience the power of capital through cars and roads in Honolulu. And they perceived Hawaii as a land inhabited by Koreans, not as a complete foreign soil. And at least until the 1920s, there was active exchange between Korean travelers and Korean immigrants in Hawaii, with the travel itineraries primarily focused on visiting Korean communities. And they witnessed the solidarity and patriotism within the Korean community in Hawaii, and they were pretty impressed by that, which inspired them with new motivation. And what made their trip even more special was that unforgettable national experience singing 애국가 in front of 태극기, which was forbidden in Korea. So that's all about my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is a wonderful presentation. Please give a big applause one more time. I didn't realize that passage of time. We still have some good, sufficient time for us to ask questions to Professor An. So if you have any question, please raise your hand. So before others asking question, so were you writing or kind of preparing this book while you're here?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So I think we made a very excellent decision to invite you here when you were applying for. Actually, when she was interested in becoming a visiting scholar, she submitted the application. But I have received several letters from different people, some from AKS and from another places, saying that she is excellent. But yeah, you now see why they did.
Thank you very much. I'm just curious, if you look at the indigenous Korean newspapers that are being published here in Hawaii, what are they saying about these Korean visitors that are coming in and writing about Hawaii?
That's an interesting point, but I haven't thought about looking at the Korean newspapers dealing with Korean travelers visiting. But I think it's a good idea to check if there is any articles about that. But 이덕기 선생님 is like, no.
No, there's no news at all.
But like Jang Deok-soo, he said he met like 200 Korean people at the Gyomin-Chonghaegan. So there must be like some big event, Korean event, and then or like Kim Dong-sung. When Kim Dong-sung visited Honolulu and also Maui and then Big Island, he said he was welcomed by hundreds of Koreans. So maybe some like a big event was reported in the newspapers.
In the same vein, when Lee Seung-man first visited, overnight they invited almost 100 some people to hear from him. So those visitors from Korea during the time were also very, very well recognized, I think, by local people in Hawaii.
I just realized that Jang Deok-soo met Lee Seung-man for the first time in Hawaii.
Yes.
I think it was their first meeting.
Yes.
And if you look at the Lee Seung-man's book, my book on it, Lee Seung-man sent some money to Jang Deok-soo to continue his study. Whatever it is.
I see.
It's just interesting.
Yeah.
And the house Jang Deok-soo visited, Seung-man Lee's house, he, described quite in detail.
Right,
It's
right.
in the Kaimuki.
Yes.
So if you know where that is, and it's really becoming very interesting.
Right. He described it was like located on the hill, looking the whole scenery of Honolulu. So I'm thought about like Kaimuki, or what's interesting about that part was like he described about the house in a very detailed way, like what kind of stone was located and what kind of color of the flowers were like. And then he was so happy, excited, but also nervous to meet Lee Seung-man because he admired him so much. And then he thought about the greetings, but he just forgot everything when he went into the house. And then he also described about how Lee Seung-man looked like, but he didn't like. I was expecting he wrote about their discussions, but it was like omitted because of the censorship, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for this very interesting talk. I was wondering if you can clarify one aspect that you talked about, how the earlier travelers visited Korean communities, but later on it was more kind of focused on kind of typical tourism. Like, why do you think that shift happened?
Yeah, that's thank you for raising that question, because I was also wondering about it and was actually thinking about it until this morning. And then I first thought maybe that's like a individual preference, but I think maybe it's related to the atmosphere of Korean community here. And then I read 이덕기 선생님's book about 국민회, and then so the Korean community was not very active in the 1930s. And I think that's why they didn't meet the Korean leaders when they visited, because mostly it was the president's job to greet the Korean people at the port and then drove them around the island. So I compared the period, and then Kim Dong-sung and Jang Deok-soo rode the Pastor Min Chano-'s car, and at the time Min Chano was president of the KNA, and then later Imyeongbin, or I forgot, but someone met Choi Chang-dok in the time that he was president of KNA. So the KNA, it was one of the KNA leaders' job to meet and welcome the travelers. But if the Korean community was not very active and then the leadership was not very strong in the 1930s, maybe there was no chance for that. Yeah, but I'm still thinking about that, and if anyone has an idea, please advise me.
Hi, I missed the first 10 minutes, so maybe you talked about it. And I was wondering, first, this is published both in Korean and English, is bilingual? Or?
No, it's only in Korean.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
and second question is, what led you to study Hyun Soon's travelogue in particular? What was your study before, and where were you going after this?
Okay. So I'm a linguist and then doing Korean language changes in the early 20th century. And then initially, I didn't know about this book, and I applied to this center to examine Korean newspapers in Hawaii, especially the advertisement. And then as I learned more about it, and then I got to know many documents published about Hawaii or in Hawaii. And then I thought that this will be interesting to look at while I stay here. And then my future plan is not about this book, but while studying about Korean immigration history in Hawaii, I could join a tombstone robbing project here. And then I visited several cemeteries of Korean people. And then I found this interesting and also strange because they used the old Hangul, old style Hangul, not the contemporary one, like areya, like the dot, or like unpalatalized form like Chon as Tion. And then and the people died in 1970s or something. And I thought it's very strange, but because if they knew that it's like the wrong spelling, they must have not used that spelling for the tombstones. So I got the idea that maybe the standard of the correct writing of Hangul in Hawaii was different from Korea until the pretty late. And then so I started to examine the newspapers and other documents the Korean people wrote, and then their spelling until the 1960s. So I'm still doing my research about that, and then hopefully publish the paper this year. Yes, thank you.
This is kind of a tangent, but Hyun Soon's family ended up playing a very important role in Korean American politics, and I was wondering if you could say something about that.
Yes. I thought I do not have the time for explaining that, so thank you for the question. So I think Hyun Soon, I think I have to start from the Hyun Soon's father. So before going to Japan, so Hyun Soon's father was a key member of 독립협회, the Independence Club, and he was one of a few people who were insisting the political reform to the constitutional monarch instead of an absolute monarch. So there was a conflict between the King Gojong and then that Independence Club. And then Gojong was threatened by that after 만민 공동회, and so he disorganized the Independence Club and then punished the people, the leaders, the progressive leaders. So Hyun Soon's father, Hyun Jae-chang, was sentenced, was punished, and then he sent to the prison. And then later, his father escaped Korea and then moved to Japan and then met Hyun Soon studying there. So he was born to quite a wealthy family, but his family kind of collapsed after 독립협회 was disorganized. So after coming back, so he had to make money, and then he ended up going to Hawaii. And so Hyun Soon didn't express his political opinions really obviously, I think, until the March 1st movement, but he just lives as a pastor and educator. But he believed that while I think that thought was formed while he was living in Hawaii, but he believed in the value of democracy and Christianism, so he devoted himself into the education for the spreading democracy to Koreans, and also worked as a pastor. But right before the March 1st movement, he met the national leaders, and then they sent Hyun Soon to Shanghai, and his role was to was to send out the news about the March 1st movement to the foreign presses because he was fluent in English and then he knew many people living in America. And then he also was in charge of preparing the government in Shanghai. So he acted his job very well. And then he was also appointed as a member of the Korean Commission to America and Europe. So he sent a letter to the U.S. president to get a kind of a recognition that Korea is a now independent country, but he didn't get a reply from the states. And then he was frustrated, and then after he went to Russia and he met like a communist parties, and then he also personally met Lenin, and he was highly influenced by him. And then they also formed his political views. Like before, he trusted the American republicanism, but later on, he kind of think about Korea's own way of democracy. It's not American-style democracy. So it's like a combination of like politically democracy, but economically, he wanted to adopt some socialistic the plans. So and then later on, when he came back to Honolulu in 1923, he had that progressive mind, and then he didn't totally agree with Lee Seung-man, and then and he was he was a member of Minhyuk-dang, and then with the socialist friends, and then later he moved to LA because at that time LA was a kind of the group of the progressive mind people gathered in LA in the Korean community. And yes, so he devoted himself, and I think he did everything he could do to contribute to the independence of Korea, by fully mobilizing his abilities. So, yeah.
For your information, our center has more than 50 collections. Among them, one of the popular collections is David Hyun collection.
Yes.
And we have a collection available, and many scholars come to study the contents of the collection. Because of lack of funding, we could not scan everything on our own. So whenever visiting researchers or other professors are coming, we let them scan them and require them to submit the scanned copy to us first, and we add a watermark and give this watermarked version to them. And we have been storing those files, and now we are starting to offer services of those scanned files through our website. So David Hyun collection is currently being uploaded, and soon those scanned files will be made available through our website. So if you know anybody, any agencies or any institution who is willing to support this project, that will be great. But anyways, this is very good because David Hyun collection itself has a lot of important materials. But this Hyun Soon's travelogue was one of the very often visited items. So have you read it through our collection here?
No, it was before I came here, so I used the one housed at the IKS.
Okay,
Yes.
very good. Okay, so Mr. Kim, you have a question?
Not a question, but a comment. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the presentation. One of my first comment was I found great value in the contrast between perspectives of their first impressions of Hawaii. For example, the observations of people diving for coins. Because while one may have felt that it was treating Hawaiians poorly, I've heard stories from others all relished the chance to dive for coins because they're younger, and that was their spending money. It was fun and entertaining for them. And then my second is not a criticism, but it is about generalizations. I find it so interesting that some early generalizations still carry on to this day, right? Clearly not completely accurate, but it's just an observation. I really appreciate this all being put together in a single place where, unfortunately, I can't read Korean, so I'm going to have ask others to help me read it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for your comments. Yeah.
Gary?
Thank you so much. It's really amazing, these things that are coming out. And Tae-young, I just want to make a comment like Tae-young. I mean, I didn't know, too, that, before Hawaii, the Koreans say it was Powa, but my father told me that the old Koreans would say Powa, And I said, what was that? So it's interesting now that all these things are coming out, But like Tae-young was saying, about the coin dropping. Also, there were not only Hawaiian, Hawaiian native divers like that, but they were all, there were Japanese, Chinese, and I would think that maybe one or two Koreans would be diving off there because there were a lot. They were called wharf rats. Wharf rats? Yeah, that's what they were called. And there's a novel written by this guy, this second generation Japanese guy. It was called "Don't Give Up the Ship." It's a rare book. I have a copy. I got it. I bought it for $100 at the Asian American Studies Conference. And describes that thing and how it was really a multinational kind of thing. Of course, mostly it was Hawaiian kids. But at that time, the second generation, there was already, and there's some Korean kids in there too. I mean, I would say one or two, maybe, that kind of thing, But so it's an interesting thing. And, again, what Tang was saying with generalizations, sometimes we tend to not, see only a black and white kind of situation like that, And the other thing I just want to say too is, you mentioned the boat Siberia. My oldest uncle, my father's son, my kunabaji, and Ducky knows about him. Park Chin Han, he was one of the editors of the Dongji Ilbo, right? His wife is my auntie Siberia, who was actually one of the first Koreans to be born. Coming to, she was on that boat, and she was born. So I just, when you said that, my wife and I, we looked at each other and said, talking about anti-Siberia. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this.
Thank you for the comments. I was expecting some local perspectives about his comments about Hawaii, and then thank you both for that. And then since you brought the name of Siberia, I didn't talk about it, but Sano-sung wrote about an interesting episode about the name, not the name, but Siberia, that one day, while he was suffering from a food, one day he was served a red bean rice to celebrate a Russian woman giving a birth in the ship. So at the time, he said there was a custom to give the ship's name to the baby. So the baby was named Siberia, and then the ship company gave the baby a free voucher that he or she could use for the whole lifetime. So it was a pretty great deal for a newborn. Yeah.
So another thing that I might have missed, what year was this book written or published?
So I think he started to write this book after coming back to Korea. Then it was 1907. He came back to Korea, and then this book was published in 1909. So probably a year.
So he was 27, 29, and then I was asking this question in relation to their comments about the education of the Hawaiian people that it was mentioned. It's one of the in the coin throwing and how he feels sad about the fact that by witnessing that he's realizing what it was done to the Korean people when they got the coins also, and because Hyun Soon's life he was educated, which means that he's from a certain class, and then he came to Hawaii and he became a working class, and then all his children worked, and then some of them Alice Hyun, she was exiled, and so. I was wondering if you mentioned that kind of class change, because some of the comments some of the impressions he has when he first came here must be so different when he's older and he,
So Hyun Soon didn't mention about the coin dropping thing, but there was by other travelers later. But Hyun Soon, when he came to Hawaii, Hyun Soon worked at the farm, but not as a worker, laborer, but he was a translator. And so he was in the not as he was not working at the farms, but he was kind of a manager. And then he was paid like double than the workers. So I don't think his like social status changed after coming here as an immigrant, but they got good education here. So I think they didn't work at the farms. So maybe 이덕기 선생님 can add something for that.
So was Alice Hyun raised in Hawaii?
Yes, actually, Alice was the first Korean baby born in Hawaii, right?
Yeah. Alice, the Hyun Soon arrived March 3rd, and the first child born, Korean baby born in Hawaii was the Hyun Soon's daughter, Alice Hyun, on May 8th. Coincidentally, first American baby born in Korea is Alice Appenzeller, and we don't know whether Hyun Soon copied that or not. Anyway, Alice is buried in Pyongyang right now. She was socialist, communist, and whatever. That Hyun Soon's education, the mentions in his the travelogue is talking about Koreans gather some money to try to open up the Korean school over here. That's about the first mention on the Korean education in here. And Alice came back when the Hyun Soon came back in 1923. Became the pastor of President of Christ United Methodist Church, and he opened a language school, 대동 국어학교, and Alice was the Korean class teacher. And although I don't know how good her Korean was, but anyway, she started teaching Korean language in here.
So, Mrs. Murabayashi, was there any kind of awareness about their original class, in Korea? So, was there different treatment of Yangban class and Jungin class in Hawaii after they came to Hawaii?
There is no mention of those things in any of the Korean newspapers at all. Yeah. Only one person talked about her family is a Yangban class, is Ham Ho-young's wife. Ham Ho-young was the 성균관 진사. So Ham Ho-young's wife left the recordings and talked about her family was the Yangban class and all that sort of thing, but no other writing about this class differences.
My wife is a very shy person, so she didn't want me to tell this story. But about, maybe 15 years ago, I picked up David Hyun at the airport and brought him to my house. And there, her mother was also there, and they were classmates from Roosevelt. So that was English Standard School. I'm sorry, it was an English. And also, while we're talking about local customs, she makes great bread. Bread. But no, not banana bread. The ulu. Yeah, I'm sorry. I couldn't think of the English word for it. Anyway. I'm learning from her. But if you want some more recipes for ulu, talk to her. She can give you. She fries it. All sorts of ways to prepare it.
That's great.
I want to do. I think I'm arguing with Ducky here that I think my auntie Siberia was the oldest Korean. To be born.
But Alice was the firstborn. May 8th.
Yeah, so Hyun's wife was pregnant.
1903.
Well, 1903.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe.
So Hyun's wife was pregnant when she came here.
Hyun Soon's English autobiography is published in some years ago by Yonsei University, so you can read his autobiography.
Thank you for the comment.
So Professor An just mentioned that Ellie's wife of Hyun Soon was pregnant when she was on board. Okay.
Hi, thank you for such a compelling talk. My question doesn't have to do with what we've been talking about, but I'm fascinated by the history and development of localized Korean cuisine and just East Asian foods in general. And I wonder if the modern travelogues note the foods that they ate here, or if they mention anything about like meatjan or anything that's localized.
Yeah. That's what I was also wondering, but I only found just one mentioning of the food, kimchi. And Jang Dok-soo had kimchi at Min Chan-ho's house, and then he was so happy about that. But they didn't mention about any other local foods they ate. Yeah.
Gary?
You know, my Wei Halmini used to make kimchi, of course, and you know, instead of using sewujot, she would use bagong, you know, the Filipino fish sauce, and instead of using the berichi, she would use like the Portuguese salted cod and stuff, and then you know those kind of things. But there was, for example, the minani, you know, the watercress. It was where you were living. There was a lot of that, so they used to use that. So there's a, you know, very similar, but you know, again, it was they had to adapt. Yeah, the Koreans had to adapt the foods and stuff. You know, and
Okay. Yes.
Any other question or comment? Okay, so do you have anything to add before we conclude?
I want to say thank you to all of you here, and then asking such important and great questions, and also giving me some comments. And I will keep my interest in immigration history of Hawaii, and then study harder after that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So this is a wonderful book talk, and we will have another book talk next week on Thursday, and we will invite famous novelist Kong Ji-young and also Professor Bruce Fulton from UBC and his wife, who translated Dogani into English. So those three people will talk about famous novel Dogani and also the translation process. And so please come again next Thursday. Thank you again for coming today. Thank you.